Hello, my name's Jaidyn Chong. I'm one of the senior teachers here at Vincent Music, and today I'm giving you a bit of a guitar lesson as a kind of general revision, but also as an introduction to a few particular chords which are important for developing calluses on the guitar, as well as just developing your just general hand strength in your left hand. So, trying to think of the words. I do apologize for noise in the background. People are just using the practice rooms. So as a bit of basic chord revision, we have our C major chord. So we have our C, so first fret, B string, second fret on the D string with your middle finger, and then we have our third fret of the A string just with our third finger. No playing the lower note, no playing the open E, no playing the low E, pardon me, but making sure that as best we can that chord rings nice and true. We also have our D major. You can play with the low A as well, but definitely not with the low E. Otherwise, it just muddies the sound. But we otherwise have our first and second finger. So our first finger on the second fret of the G string, second finger on the second fret of the high E string, and third finger on the third fret of the B string. Now, if we were to kind of reverse the positions a little bit, our third finger stays in the same place, but for our D minor, we have our second finger on the A, which is second fret G string, and then we have our first finger on the first fret of the high E string. And then let's go back to our first beginning chord, E minor. So we have our E minor, so we just have our second and third fingers on the second frets of the A and D strings respectively. And if we wanted to make that a major, we put our first fret on the first fret of the G string, making that a E, G sharp, E. But taking that position, we actually can slide down now to one whole set of strings to make for a higher sound, but also for our A minor chord. So you could technically play the low E, but usually not because it might be a bit too dark of a sound and slightly muddy again. But for the A minor, that's our position there. And for our A major, unfortunately this is pretty much a complete finger swap. Even though we are doing similar fingers, what we're doing is that we're taking our final two fingers, moving them down, and shifting the rest up. Because we have for the A major, we have our all on the second fret of the D. So for the D, G, and B strings, they're now on fret number 2, making it E, A, and C sharp. And otherwise, one of the other main chords that we'll kind of look over is our G major. There's several different ways to play this. The traditional variant is either using your third or fourth finger on the third fret of the high E string for fret 3. It's really up to a matter of personal preference, but I prefer using the third finger. And there's also different ways of actively playing it. You can shift your hand slightly, and you can omit that the A string. So see how I'm producing what's called a dead tone? This is what I'm doing because I've shifted my hand so that I'm not actually playing any part of the A string at all. You could also block out the fourth. You can use your third finger, so your ring finger, to stop the major flow and make it an open fifth sound, which is what's called a G5. Usually, you go for a variant of the G major chord, but you can also just go for a more perfect fifth sounding chord, hence the chord name G5. So, in terms of some of the other chords that are kind of there as an example, we have what's called our dominant seventh, or just shortened to seventh chords. Now there is a big difference between our dominant sevenths as well as what's called a major sevenths, or otherwise minor sevenths. But today I'm just going to mainly cover only the dominant seventh sounds, or just or otherwise just what's called our regular seventh sounds. So in this case, let's start with so let's go back to our D major, for instance. We're on our D major, but if I wanted to go for the seventh sound, what I would actually do is I would take my third finger, just taking it into an individual note process, and I would actually repeat a very similar position to the D major. What I'm doing is that instead of having my first finger on the second fret of the G string, I'm actually using my third finger for that placehold, because the first finger is now going to be on the first fret of the B string for our C natural, A, C, F sharp. Now the reason why dominant chords are used kind of even at all is because they have a good transition into other chords. So in this case, when we're talking about a chord progression, it's usually marked as from chord 5 to chord 1. Now, dominant sevenths are usually always on the chord 5. So in this case, if I'm going from D, so D, C, D, C, B, A, G. So I'm going from the D to the G, D, C, B, A, G. Now that's a very common progression, whether it's in classical music, or otherwise folk music, or otherwise lots of guitar music. So, those are just some kind of little examples there. Now, so for the D7, just to kind of re-clarify that, we have our first finger on the first fret of the B string, we have our second finger and third finger on the second fret of the G string and the high E string. And like the D major chord, we don't play that low E at the bottom. It doesn't quite work so well, it's just too muddy of a sound on the guitar. Another chord to put into consideration is actually using the same D7 position, but it's actually going to be a bit harder because we're going to be using, actually on that F sharp note, which is second fret E, where instead of the D7, we're going to be using that D7 position and actually taking it first off to our second fret A string. So we'd go from that D7 with that. So D7, our third finger on the lowest string that's there, the G string, A, C, F sharp. So second, first, second. And in this case, we're going to what's called our B7, which was going from B, A, G, F sharp, E. But in this particular case, we're using the D7 position from before, and we're adding on the second fret, we are adding an F sharp. This one makes it a fair bit harder, at least in terms of our calluses, because with our calluses, regardless of what string guitar you use, whether it's a steel string or otherwise a nylon string, our pinky finger is naturally our weakest finger, just simply biologically, and it takes a long while to train it up. So in terms of how that would actually sound, we have a B, B sharp, A, B natural, F sharp. And then if we kind of follow the dominant to our one root, so B, A, G, F sharp. So with this particular route that we have here, we don't actually need to move our fingers too much. This is actually a good way to practice kind of our chord changing exercise, particularly for more complicated chords such as this. Now, why B7 is a very popular chord at all, I'm just keeping an eye on time, why it's a popular chord at all is just because it's a very bluesy chord. So, There was a few other chords that I kind of displayed in there as well, but just to keep it simple, or at least simpler, let's stick with just our 2 chords for the moment. Let's stick with our D7. So very similar to our D major, but only this time we're just changing our fingers again, and our chords are. So we have our first finger on the first fret of the C, of the B, pardon me, and then our second and third finger on the second fret of the A and the high E. So we then take those same fingers and make so we're beginning the same position on the second fret. Pardon me, it's a bit of a tricky one actually. But we have B, D sharp, A, B, and F sharp. So no playing of that low E again. I mean, it can actually create a nice effect, but if you just want that B7 chord, then we better avoid playing that. But the B7 leads then to our E minor. So, with that, I'll leave that there for today, but I hope you have a good day and take care. Bye.